The scar that ran from Faith Ramsey's left temple to her jawline had been there for 10 years, a reminder of the wagon accident that killed her parents and left her an orphan at 14. But it was only in the last month that it had cost her everything she thought she wanted. Independence. Missouri in the spring of 1878 was a town on the edge of civilization, where wagon trains still departed for the western territories and dreams were bought and sold for the price of provisions. And Faith had grown up believing that someday a man would look past the raised pink flesh that marked her face and see the woman beneath. She had been wrong about Thomas Whitman, the banker's son who had courted her for 6 months before his mother saw them together at the church social and pulled him aside with a horrified expression that Faith could read even from across the room. The next day, Thomas had come to the dress shop where Faith worked as a seamstress and told her in a voice that shook with what she thought was regret that he could not continue their courtship, that his family had expectations, that surely she understood. Faith had understood perfectly, and when he left, she had locked the shop door and cried until her good eye was as red and swollen as the scarred one. That had been 4 weeks ago, and now Faith moved through her days with a practiced numbness that kept the hurt at bay. She woke before dawn in the small room above the dress shop that Mrs. Henderson let her rent in exchange for extra work, dressed in her plain gray work dress that buttoned high at the throat, and pinned her dark blonde hair back severely to keep it from falling across her face. The scar was always visible, always the first thing people saw when they looked at her, and she had learned long ago not to hide it because hiding only made people more curious. Better to let them look, let them satisfy their morbid interest, and then perhaps they would see past it to the careful stitching she could do, the way she could take a bolt of fabric and transform it into something beautiful. The morning was already warm when she opened the shop, the kind of sticky heat that promised a sweltering afternoon. Independence was crowded with travelers preparing for the journey west, and the dress shop had been busier than usual with women wanting sturdy traveling clothes and men needing shirts mended before the long trek. Faith had just finished pinning a hem when the bell above the door chimed, and a man walked in, bringing with him the smell of leather and horses and the outdoors. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled his worn leather vest, and dark hair that needed cutting curled at the collar of his blue cotton shirt. His face was tanned from long hours in the sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. He held his hat in his hands, a dusty brown Stetson that had seen better days, and he looked around the shop with the slightly lost expression of a man who had never been in such a place before. "Can I help you?" Faith asked, setting down her pins and standing. She kept her scarred side turned slightly away out of habit, even though she had just told herself that morning that she would stop doing that. The man's eyes met hers, and she saw they were a striking blue-gray, the color of storm clouds over the prairie. "I hope so, madam. I need a shirt mended, and the lady at the boarding house said you were the best seamstress in Independence." Faith felt a small flush of pleasure at the compliment, even second-hand. "I can certainly take a look at it. What is the damage?" He reached into the bag he carried and pulled out a shirt that had once been white, but was now more the color of dust. There was a long tear down the sleeve, the kind that came from catching on barbed wire or a sharp branch. "Got caught on a fence post helping a rancher outside of town. It is my only good shirt, and I have business in Kansas City next week." Faith took the shirt and examined the tear. It was clean, which would make it easier to mend, and the fabric was good quality despite its current state. "I can fix this. It will take about an hour if you want to wait, or you can come back this afternoon." "I will wait if that is all right," he said. I do not have much else to do, and I would rather not lose track of it. Faith nodded and gestured to the chair by the window. Make yourself comfortable. There is water in the pitcher on the table if you are thirsty. Thank you, madam. I appreciate it. He settled into the chair, which creaked under his weight, and Faith carried the shirt to her work table where the light was better. She threaded her needle with practiced ease and began working on the tier, her stitches small and even. The man watched her for a moment, then seemed to realize that staring might make her uncomfortable, and turned his attention to the street outside. Faith was grateful for his discretion. She had grown used to people staring at her scar, but it still made her self-conscious when someone watched her work. "You are not from Independence," she said after a few minutes of silence. It was not really a question. "No, madam. I am from Texas originally, but I have been working as a trail hand and ranch worker wherever I can find employment. The name is Benjamin Oliver, though most people call me Ben." "Faith Ramsey," she replied, keeping her eyes on her stitching. "Have you been in Independence long? Just a few days?" "I am thinking of signing on with one of the wagon trains heading west, maybe making my way to Oregon or California. I have heard there is good ranch land out there for men willing to work for it." Faith had heard the same stories, the tales of fertile valleys and open range that drew people west like moths to a flame. She had never understood the appeal herself. Independence was the only home she remembered, even though her parents had been traveling through when the accident happened. The people who ran the orphanage had been kind enough in their way, and when she turned 16, Mrs. Henderson had taken her on as an apprentice. It was not the life she had imagined as a girl, but it was stable and safe, and after Thomas, she had decided that was enough. "It is a hard journey," she said. "I have sewn traveling clothes for dozens of families, and I hear stories. The trail takes a toll." "Most things worth having do," Ben said, and there was something in his voice that made her glance up. He was looking at her now, really looking, and she instinctively turned her head to hide the scar. "I am sorry," he said immediately. "I did not mean to make you uncomfortable. You just have very steady hands. It is impressive to watch." Faith felt her cheeks warm. Compliments about her work she could accept, but compliments that might be about her personally made her nervous. Thomas had complimented her too, told her she was pretty in a certain light, that her hair was a lovely color, that her smile was sweet. All of it had been lies, or at least not enough to overcome his mother's horror at the thought of him marrying a scarred woman. "Thank you," she said quietly, and focused on her stitching with renewed intensity. They did not speak again until she finished, tying off the thread and trimming it close. She held up the shirt to examine her work, making sure the seam was strong and the stitches nearly invisible. Satisfied, she carried it back to Ben. "All finished. That will be 20 cents. Ben stood and took the shirt, running his fingers over the mended tier with an approving expression. "You did excellent work. I can barely see where it was torn." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a quarter. "Keep the change. You earned it." "That is not necessary," Faith protested, but he was already putting his hat back on. "I insist. A job well done deserves proper payment." He smiled at her then, a warm, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and Faith felt something flutter in her chest that she quickly suppressed. "Thank you, Mr. Oliver." "Ben, please. Mr. Oliver was my father." He hesitated, then added, "Would it be all right if I came back if I need any other mending? I am hard on clothes, and I have a feeling I will need your services again before I leave Independence." Faith nodded, not trusting herself to speak. He smiled again, tipped his hat, and left, the bell chiming behind him. For the rest of the day, Faith found her thoughts drifting back to the cowboy with the storm cloud eyes. It was foolish, she told herself. He was just being kind, just a customer who appreciated good work. There was nothing more to it, and she would do well to remember what had happened with Thomas. Men did not want women with scars, not really, not when there were whole, unmarked women to be had. But that night as she lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of independence settling down for the night, she allowed herself to wonder what it might be like if someone did look past the scar. What it might be like if someone like Ben Oliver saw her as more than a skilled seamstress with a tragic past. She told herself it was a foolish dream, but she dreamed it anyway. The next few days passed in their usual rhythm. Faith worked on a wedding dress for the mayor's daughter, took in 3 pairs of trousers that needed hemming, and repaired a tear in a canvas wagon cover that a family needed before their departure west. She did not see Ben Oliver again, and she told herself she was not disappointed. He had probably already left Independence, already on his way to whatever new life he was chasing. Men like him did not stay in one place long. It was the following Monday when he came back, this time with a vest that was missing 2 buttons and had a seam coming apart at the shoulder. Faith was helping another customer when he entered, and she felt her heart do that foolish flutter again when she saw him. "I will be with you in just a moment," she called, and he nodded, settling into the same chair by the window. The customer, a severe-looking woman who was outfitting her daughter for the journey to California, took another 20 minutes to make up her mind about fabric for a traveling dress. Faith showed her every bolt they had, her patience never wavering even though the woman changed her mind 3 times. Finally, a choice was made, payment was rendered, and the woman left with a promise to return for a fitting. "You have the patience of a saint," Ben said as Faith approached. "I would have lost my temper 10 minutes in." Faith smiled despite herself. "It is part of the job. Not everyone knows what they want right away." She took the vest he held out and examined it. "This should be simple enough. I have buttons that will match and the seam is an easy fix. It will take about 30 minutes. "I am in no hurry," Ben said. "It is too hot to do much of anything out there anyway." He was right. The temperature had climbed steadily all morning and the air inside the shop was thick, and still despite the windows Faith had opened. She could feel sweat gathering at the back of her neck as she worked, and she wondered how the travelers managed in their heavy wagons under the full sun. "Have you decided whether you are going west?" she asked as she selected buttons from her collection, still thinking on it. "I have been talking to some of the wagon masters, getting a sense of what they need. Most of them want experienced hands, men who know how to handle livestock and can scout ahead. I can do the work, but I am not sure I want to spend 4 months eating dust and sleeping on the ground." "What would you do instead?" Ben was quiet for a moment. "There is a ranch about 20 miles south of here, along the Missouri River. The owner is looking for someone to help manage his cattle operation. It would mean staying in one place for a while, putting down roots. I have not done that in a long time." Faith understood the appeal of staying in one place. She had never known anything else, but she could imagine how exhausting it must be to always be moving, never settling. "It sounds like a good opportunity. Maybe. Or maybe I would get restless after a few months and take off again. I have a habit of doing that." "Why?" The question was out before Faith could stop herself, and she felt her cheeks flush. "I am sorry, that is none of my business." "No, it is all right." Ben leaned back in the chair, his expression thoughtful. "I guess I have always been looking for something, though I am not sure what. My parents had a small ranch in Texas, nothing fancy but enough to live on. When I was 19, there was a drought, bad enough that we lost most of the cattle. My father tried to hold on, but the bank foreclosed. He died the next winter and my mother followed him 6 months later. I have been drifting ever since, working where I can, never staying long enough to feel like I might lose it all again." Faith's hands stilled on the vest. "I am so sorry." I know what it is like to lose your parents." Ben's eyes met hers. "You do?" She nodded. "Wagon accident when I was 14. That is how I got this." She gestured to her scar, the first time she had ever acknowledged it directly to someone she barely knew. Ben stood and walked over to her work table. Faith tensed, expecting the usual reaction, the quick look away or the expression of pity. Instead, he studied her face with the same careful attention he had given his mended shirt. "May I ask you something?" he said quietly. Faith nodded, her throat tight. "Does it hurt?" The question surprised her. Most people wanted to know how it happened, or they offered empty platitudes about how it was not that bad, or they simply pretended it was not there. No one had ever asked if it hurt. "Not anymore," she said. "It did at first for months, but now it is just part of me." Ben reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away and trace the length of the scar with his fingertip. His touch was feather light, almost reverent, and Faith found she could not breathe. "It does not make you less beautiful," he said. "If anything, it makes you more so. You survived something terrible and you are still here, still making beautiful things with your hands. That takes strength." Faith felt tears prick her eyes. In all the years since the accident, no one had ever called her beautiful. Pretty in a certain light, yes. Sweet-looking when she smiled, yes. But never beautiful, and never in a voice that suggested the speaker truly meant it. "Why would you say that?" she whispered. "Because it is true." Ben's hand dropped away, and Faith found herself missing the warmth of his touch. "I am sorry if I overstepped. I just could not stand to see you turn away like you were ashamed. You have nothing to be ashamed of." Faith wiped at her eyes, trying to compose herself. "You are very kind, Mr. Oliver." "Ben," he corrected gently. "And I am not being kind, I am being honest. There is a difference." Faith wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this man, this drifter who had wandered into her shop by chance, truly saw her as beautiful. But Thomas had taught her caution, had shown her that words could be cheap and feelings could change when faced with outside judgment. "I should finish your vest," she said, her voice not quite steady. Ben nodded and returned to his chair, but the air between them felt different now, charged with something Faith did not dare name. She worked in silence, her fingers moving automatically through the familiar motions while her mind raced. What did Ben Oliver want from her? Was this some kind of game, a way to pass the time in a town where he knew no one? Or could he possibly mean what he said? When the vest was finished, she held it out to him. "All done. That will be 30 cents for the buttons and the repair." Ben paid her, his fingers brushing hers as he took the vest, and Faith felt that touch all the way to her toes. "Thank you, Faith. You do excellent work. Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "Will you be staying in Independence much longer? I am meeting with the ranch owner tomorrow." "If it goes well, I will be around for a while. If not, I will probably sign on with one of the wagon trains." He put on the vest, buttoning it carefully. "Would it be all right if I came by again? Even if I do not have anything that needs mending?" Faith's heart hammered in her chest. This was dangerous. This was how she had gotten hurt before, but when she looked into Ben's eyes, she saw something that had not been in Thomas's. She saw sincerity. "Yes," she said, "that would be all right." Ben's smile was like sunrise. "Good, I will see you soon then." After he left, Faith stood in the empty shop for a long time, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart was beating too fast. She was being foolish. She knew she was being foolish. But when she closed her eyes, she could still feel the gentle touch of his finger tracing her scar, could still hear him calling her beautiful. Maybe, just maybe, she could be foolish one more time. The next evening Ben came back to the shop just as Faith was closing. She was sweeping the floor, her hair coming loose from its pins after the long hot day, when she saw him through the window. He was leading a horse, a sturdy bay with a white star on its forehead, and he tied it to the rail before knocking on the door. Faith set aside the broom and opened the door. "Hello, Ben. Hello, I hope I am not disturbing you. I know you are closing up. It is all right. Did you need something mended?" He smiled and shook his head. "No, I just wanted to tell you that I got the job. I start at the ranch next week." Faith felt a rush of relief so strong it surprised her. "That is wonderful. Congratulations." "Thank you. I was thinking, well, hoping really that you might let me buy you dinner, to celebrate and to thank you for being so kind to a stranger." Every cautious instinct Faith possessed told her to say no to protect herself, to remember Thomas and his mother's horrified face. But the part of her that had dreamed of someone seeing past the scar, the part that had felt the gentleness in Ben's touch, was louder. "I would like that," she said. Ben's face lit up. "Really? That is wonderful. There is a restaurant 2 streets over, the one with the blue door. Would that suit you?" "Yes, just give me a few minutes to change." Faith hurried upstairs to her room, her hands shaking as she unpinned her hair and brushed it out. She changed into her best dress, a deep blue cotton with a modest neckline and fitted waist. It was not fancy, but it was clean and well made, and the color brought out the lighter streaks in her hair. She looked at herself in the small mirror above her washstand, at the scar that dominated the left side of her face, and took a deep breath. Ben had called her beautiful. She would try to believe him. The restaurant was owned by a German couple who served hearty food at reasonable prices. Ben led her to a table by the window, holding her chair for her before sitting down himself. Faith was acutely aware of the other diners, the way some of them glanced at her scar and then looked away. She had learned to ignore such looks, but tonight they stung more than usual. She wanted this to be perfect, wanted to be the kind of woman who could sit across from a handsome cowboy without people staring. "You look beautiful," Ben said, and the sincerity in his voice made her forget about the other diners. "Thank you. You look very nice as well." He did. He had clearly made an effort, his hair neatly combed, his shirt clean and pressed. It was the shirt she had mended for him, she realized, and something about that touched her deeply. They ordered food, roast chicken with potatoes and vegetables, and as they ate, they talked. Ben told her about the ranch, about how the owner was a widower named Patterson who needed help managing a growing herd. The work would be hard but fair, and there was a cabin on the property where Ben would live. It was not much, he said, but it was more permanent than anything he had had in years. Faith told him about the dress shop, about Mrs. Henderson, who had given her a chance when no one else would, about the satisfaction of taking raw fabric and transforming it into something useful and beautiful. She told him about growing up in the orphanage, about how she had felt invisible until she discovered she had a talent for sewing. She did not tell him about Thomas. That wound was still too fresh. "You ever think about leaving Independence?" Ben asked as they finished their meal. "Sometimes," Faith admitted. "But this is my home. I have a job, a place to live. It may not be exciting, but it is mine." "I can understand that. After losing the ranch, I think I was afraid to want anything permanent again, but maybe it is time to stop running." "What changed?" Ben looked at her, and Faith felt the intensity of his gaze like a physical touch. "I met someone who made me think about what I might be missing." Faith's breath caught. "Ben, I need you to be honest with me. Why are you doing this? Why did you ask me to dinner?" "Because I wanted to spend time with you. Because when I am around you, I feel like I can breathe properly for the first time in years." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I know we barely know each other. I know this is fast, but I would like to know you better if you will let me." Faith looked down at their joined hands. His was calloused and scarred from hard work, hers marked by tiny pricks from needles and years of careful stitching. They were both marked by their pasts, both survivors in their own ways. I was courted once before, she said quietly, by a man named Thomas Whitman. He was kind and attentive, and I thought he cared for me. But when his mother saw my scar, she made him end things. He came to me and said his family had expectations, that he was sorry but he could not marry someone who looked like me. Ben's grip on her hand tightened. He was a fool, maybe, but his mother was not wrong. I do not look like other women. I am marked damaged. You are not damaged. Ben's voice was fierce. You are strong and talented and kind. You are beautiful, Faith, and anyone who cannot see that is blind. Faith wanted to believe him. Looking into his eyes, she thought maybe she could. I am scared, she whispered. So am I, Ben admitted. I am scared of staying in one place, scared of wanting something and losing it again. But I am more scared of walking away from you, without even trying. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their honesty hanging between them. Then Faith squeezed his hand. I would like to know you better too, she said. Ben's smile was worth every moment of fear. They walked back to the dress shop slowly, neither of them wanting the evening to end. The streets of Independence were quieter now. Most of the travelers settled in for the night, and the air had finally started to cool. Ben told her stories about his time on the trail, about the places he had seen, and the characters he had met. Faith found herself laughing at his descriptions, the way he could make even the most mundane events sound like adventures. When they reached the shop, Ben tied his horse to the rail again and walked Faith to the door. She turned to face him, suddenly nervous. She had never been kissed, not really. Thomas had pecked her cheek once, a dry, awkward brush of lips that had left her disappointed. She wondered if Ben would try to kiss her, wondered if she wanted him to. Thank you for dinner, she said. I had a wonderful time. So did I. Faith, would it be all right if I called on you again? I know I will be busy at the ranch, but I could come into town on Sundays. I would like that very much. Ben reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. I meant what I said earlier. You are beautiful. Faith felt tears threaten again, but this time they were tears of hope rather than pain. No one has ever made me feel the way you do. How do I make you feel, seen? She whispered. Really seen, not just the scar, but all of me. Ben leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his lips to her forehead, right above the scar. It was the gentlest, most tender kiss Faith had ever received, and it meant more than 1,000 passionate embraces. I see you, he said softly. All of you, and I would very much like to see more. That night, Faith lay in bed with her hand pressed to her forehead, to the spot where Ben had kissed her. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying and wonderful. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready to jump. The next Sunday Ben came into town as promised, arriving at the dress shop just as Faith was closing up after the church crowd had cleared. She had spent the morning helping with alterations for the pastor's wife, and her fingers ached from the fine stitching required for the delicate fabric. But when she saw Ben walking up the street, his horse's reins loose in his hand and a smile on his face, the ache disappeared. "Hello," she called from the doorway. "How was your first week at the ranch?" "Exhausting and wonderful," Ben said, tying his horse and climbing the steps to join her. "Mr. Patterson has me working from sunup to sundown, but the work is good, honest. I forgot how much I missed that." "You look tired," Faith observed. There were new lines around Ben's eyes, and his skin was even more tan than before. "I am, but it is a good tired. The kind that comes from building something instead of just drifting." He reached out and took her hand. "I have been thinking about you all week, about this." Faith blushed but did not pull away. "I have been thinking about you too. I was hoping you might take a walk with me. There is a spot by the river that Mr. Patterson told me about. He says it is beautiful this time of year." Faith hesitated. She had work to do, sewing that needed to be finished before Monday. But the hope in Ben's eyes, the way he held her hand like it was something precious, made the decision easy. Let me get my bonnet. They walked through Independence toward the river, leading Ben's horse behind them. Faith felt self-conscious at first, aware of the people they passed, the way some of them stared at her scar or whispered behind their hands. But Ben seemed oblivious to them, chatting easily about the ranch, and the cattle, and the cabin he was slowly making into a home. His comfort eased her own, and by the time they reached the river path, she had almost forgotten to worry about what others thought. The spot Mr. Patterson had recommended was lovely, a bend in the Missouri where cottonwood trees provided shade, and the water ran clear and relatively calm. Ben spread his jacket on the grass for Faith to sit on, then settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "This is beautiful," Faith said, watching the water ripple past. "I have lived in Independence for years, and I have never come out here." "Why not?" Faith shrugged. "I suppose I never had a reason. I work most days, and on Sundays I go to church and then back to my room. It is not much of a life, but it is what I know." "It sounds lonely." "It is," Faith admitted, "but I convinced myself that lonely was better than hurt." Ben was quiet for a moment. "I understand that feeling. After my parents died, I told myself I was better off alone. That way I did not have to worry about losing anyone else. But the truth is, being alone just means losing yourself slowly instead of all at once." Faith turned to look at him. "Is that why you took the job at the ranch? To stop being alone?" "Partly. But mostly because I met you and realized that maybe I was ready to stop running." He met her eyes. "I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other. But Faith, when I am with you, I feel like I have finally found what I have been looking for." Faith's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Ben could hear it. "What is that?" "A reason to stay." She should have been frightened by the intensity of his words, by how quickly this was all happening. But instead, she felt a sense of rightness, as if some part of her had been waiting for this moment, for this man, all along. "I am scared," she said honestly. "The last man who courted me left when his family objected to my scar. What if your employer does not approve? What if the people at the ranch judge you for being with me?" Ben took both of her hands in his. "Mr. Patterson lost his wife 5 years ago to cholera. He told me that the only thing he regrets is not appreciating every moment he had with her, not fighting harder to show the world how much he loved her. He said love is rare and precious, and anyone who judges it is a fool. I believe him." "But you do not love me," Faith protested. "We barely know each other." "Maybe not yet," Ben agreed. "But I think I could. I think I already am starting to. And that terrifies me as much as it does you, but I do not want to run from it anymore." Faith felt tears slip down her cheeks. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw honesty and vulnerability. Thomas had said pretty things, but they had been empty. Ben's words were full of weight and truth. "I could love you too," she whispered. "I think maybe I already do." Ben smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing Faith had ever seen. Then he leaned in and kissed her properly, his lips warm and gentle against hers. Faith had imagined her first real kiss 1,000 times, but nothing had prepared her for the reality. For the way her whole body seemed to come alive, for the feeling of Ben's hand cupping her unscarred cheek while his thumb gently stroked the scarred one, for the sense that she had finally found where she belonged. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathless. Ben rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I am going to court you properly," he said. "I am going to come into town every Sunday, and I am going to take you to dinner and on walks and anywhere else you want to go. And when enough time has passed that we are both sure, I am going to ask you to marry me, if you will have me." Faith laughed through her tears. "That is very presumptuous, Mr. Oliver." "Is it? Tell me you do not feel this too, and I will never mention it again." Faith could not tell him that. She felt it with every fiber of her being, this connection that had formed so quickly and burned so bright. "I feel it," she admitted. "I feel all of it." They stayed by the river until the sun began to set, talking about everything and nothing. Ben told her about his childhood in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk and helping his father with the cattle. Faith told him about the orphanage, about the other children who had come and gone while she stayed, about the fear that she would never be wanted because of her scar. They shared their dreams and their fears, their hopes and their disappointments, and with every word Faith felt herself falling deeper. When Ben finally walked her back to the dress shop, the streets were dark and quiet. He kissed her again at the door, slower this time, and Faith felt the promise in it. "I will see you next Sunday," he said, "and every Sunday after that for as long as you will let me." "I will hold you to that," Faith replied, her hand still in his. That night she lay in bed feeling like she was glowing from the inside out. She had spent so long believing that she was unlovable, that her scar made her less than other women. But Ben saw her differently. He saw her scars and her strength, her fears and her courage, and he wanted her anyway. He wanted all of her. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. The weeks that followed fell into a pattern that felt both comfortable and exciting. Ben came to town every Sunday without fail, arriving at the dress shop as soon as Faith finished with her morning customers. They would walk together, sometimes to the river, sometimes just through the streets of Independence, talking about their weeks and their lives. Ben told her about the ranch, about the cattle they were breeding and the repairs he was making to the property. Faith told him about her customers, about the dresses she was making and the personalities she dealt with. They shared meals and stolen kisses, and Faith felt herself blooming under Ben's steady affection. Mrs. Henderson noticed the change in her, of course. The older woman had run the dress shop for 30 years and had a sharp eye for the subtle shifts in people's moods. One afternoon in late June, when the shop was quiet and they were working side by side on a complicated wedding dress, she finally spoke up. "You have been walking out with someone," Mrs. Henderson said. It was not a question. Faith felt her cheeks flush. "Yes, madam. His name is Ben Oliver. He works at the Patterson Ranch." Mrs. Henderson set down her needle and looked at Faith with an expression that was hard to read. "Is he good to you?" "He is wonderful to me." "Does he know about Thomas Whitman?" Faith nodded. "I told him what happened. He said Thomas was a fool." A small smile crossed Mrs. Henderson's face. "I always thought so too. That boy never had a backbone, always doing whatever his mother told him." "You are better off without him." She picked up her needle again. "This Ben Oliver, does he make you happy?" "He does," Faith said softly. "He makes me feel like I matter, like I am more than just the scar on my face. He called me beautiful, Mrs. Henderson, and he meant it." Mrs. Henderson's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Then you hold on to him, girl. Men like that are rare." "I intend to." By the end of July, Faith and Ben had been courting for 2 months, and Faith could no longer imagine her life without him. He had become as essential to her as breathing, and she counted the days between his visits like a miser counting gold. She had met Mr. Patterson once, when Ben brought her out to the ranch to see the cabin he was fixing up. The older man had been kind and welcoming, shaking Faith's hand, and telling her that Ben had not stopped talking about her since they met. The cabin was small but charming, with a stone fireplace and windows that looked out over the rolling hills. Ben had been shy showing it to her, pointing out the repairs he had made and the ones he still planned. Faith had been able to picture herself there, could imagine cooking at that fireplace and sleeping in that bedroom, and the realization had been both thrilling and terrifying. It was in early August, on a particularly hot Sunday, that Ben took her back to their spot by the river and changed everything. They had been sitting in the shade of the cottonwoods, Faith's head resting on Ben's shoulder while he absently played with her hair. The afternoon was lazy and perfect, and Faith had almost dozed off when Ben shifted. "Faith, I need to ask you something," he said, his voice serious. Faith sat up, suddenly nervous. "What is it?" Ben took both of her hands in his, the same way he had that first afternoon by the river. But this time he looked more nervous than she had ever seen him. "I know I said I would court you properly, that I would wait until enough time had passed. But Faith, I have spent the last 3 months falling completely in love with you, and I do not want to wait any more. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every night. I want to build a life with you, a real life with a home and a future." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring, simple gold with a small stone that caught the sunlight. "I know I am not rich. I know I am just a cowboy working on someone else's ranch. But I will work hard for you, Faith. I will spend every day trying to deserve you. Will you marry me?" Faith could not breathe. She looked at the ring, at Ben's hopeful, nervous face, at the future he was offering her. A future where she would be loved and cherished, where her scar would not matter, where she could be happy. "Yes," she said, the word bursting out of her like a dam breaking. "Yes, Ben, I will marry you." Ben's shout of joy echoed across the river as he swept her into his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. Then he slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "I love you," Ben said, cupping her face in his hands. "I love your strength and your kindness and your beautiful eyes. I love the way you bite your lip when you are concentrating on your sewing. I love the sound of your laugh. I love everything about you, Faith Ramsey, and I cannot wait to make you Faith Oliver." "I love you too," Faith said, tears streaming down her face. "I love you so much it scares me. I never thought I could feel like this, that anyone could want me the way you do." "I will want you every day for the rest of our lives," Ben promised. "That is one thing you never have to doubt." They kissed then, deep and passionate, sealing the promise they had made to each other. When they finally pulled apart, Faith looked at the ring on her finger and felt a surge of joy so strong it was almost painful. She was going to be married. She was going to be Ben's wife. It was more than she had ever dared to dream. They decided to marry in September, after the heat of summer had broken but before the winter cold set in. It would be a small ceremony, just a few friends and Mr. Patterson, but Faith did not care about the size. All that mattered was that she would be marrying Ben, that she would be starting her new life with the man she loved. Mrs. Henderson cried when Faith told her, pulling her into a tight hug and declaring that Ben Oliver was the luckiest man in Missouri. She insisted on making Faith's wedding dress herself, a beautiful creation of ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Faith protested that it was too much, but Mrs. Henderson would not hear of it. She had watched Faith grow from a scared 16-year-old into a capable woman, and she was going to make sure her wedding was perfect. The weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of preparations. Faith worked on hemming her dress, making sure every stitch was perfect. Ben and Mr. Patterson prepared the cabin, adding a few extra touches to make it more suitable for a married couple. They built a proper bed frame and a wardrobe, and Ben even planted a small garden outside the kitchen window. Faith would still work at the dress shop, at least for a while, making the trip into town several times a week. It would be a long ride, but Ben had promised to teach her to handle a horse, and Mr. Patterson had offered to let her use one of the ranch's gentler mares. Thomas Whitman came into the dress shop one day in late August, looking uncomfortable and shame-faced. Faith was alone, Mrs. Henderson having gone to meet with a supplier, and she felt her whole body tense when she saw him. "Hello, Faith," Thomas said, his hat in his hands. "Thomas, what can I do for you? I heard you are getting married. I wanted to congratulate you." Faith studied him, this man who had broken her heart just a few months ago. He looked smaller somehow, less impressive than she remembered. "Thank you. I also wanted to apologize for how I ended things, for what I said. It was cowardly." "Yes, it was," Faith agreed. There was no point in sugar-coating it. Thomas flinched. "You have every right to hate me. I was a fool. My mother has been pressuring me to court Elizabeth Morrison, the doctor's daughter. She is pretty and comes from a good family, but she is also cold and selfish. Every time I am with her, I think about you, about how kind you were, how easy it was to talk to you. I threw that away because I was too weak to stand up to my mother." "Why are you telling me this?" Faith asked quietly. "Because I wanted you to know that I realize what I lost, and because I wanted to wish you happiness. You deserve it, Faith. You deserve someone who will fight for you. I hope your Ben Oliver knows how lucky he is." "He does," Faith said. "And I know how lucky I am to have found him." Thomas nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it is worth, you look different, happier. Your scar does not seem as prominent as it used to." Faith touched her face reflexively. "It has not changed, but I have. I do not see it the same way anymore. Because of Ben. Because he helped me see myself through his eyes. And I like what I see." After Thomas left, Faith stood in the empty shop for a long time, marveling at how much had changed in just a few months. Thomas's rejection had felt like the end of the world at the time, but now she could see it for what it really was, a necessary step on the path to finding Ben. If Thomas had married her, she would have spent her life with a man who saw her scar first and her second. Ben saw all of her at once, the scar and the woman wearing it, and loved them both. She was grateful for Thomas's apology, but she did not need it. She had already moved on. The day of the wedding dawned clear and cool, the first hint of autumn in the air. Faith woke early in her room above the dress shop for the last time, watching the sun rise over Independence and feeling a mixture of excitement and nostalgia. This town had been her home for so long, and even though she was only moving 20 miles away, it felt like the end of an era. Mrs. Henderson came upstairs as Faith was finishing her hair, pinning it up in a soft style that allowed her natural waves to frame her face. The older woman carried the wedding dress carefully, laying it on the bed with reverence. "You are going to be the most beautiful bride Independence has ever seen," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," Faith said, hugging her tightly. "For everything. For taking me in, for teaching me, for being the closest thing to a mother I have had since I lost my own. I do not know what I would have done without you." "You would have been fine," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "You are one of the strongest people I know, Faith, but I am glad I got to be part of your journey." She helped Faith into the dress, buttoning the long row of buttons up the back with practiced fingers. When she was finished, she turned Faith toward the mirror. Faith barely recognized herself. The woman in the mirror wore a dress that seemed to glow in the morning light, the ivory silk bringing out the gold in her hair and the green in her eyes. The scar was still there, of course, running from temple to jaw, but somehow it no longer dominated her face. Instead, it was part of the whole picture, one element of a woman who had survived and thrived and was about to start a new chapter of her life. "I look like a bride," Faith whispered. "You are a bride," Mrs. Henderson said, smiling through her tears. "Now, let us get you to that church before your groom thinks you have changed your mind." The ceremony was held at the small church on the edge of town, the same church where Faith had attended services every Sunday for years. She had walked past it 1,000 times, But today, it looked different, special. Ben was waiting at the altar, Mr. Patterson standing beside him as his witness. And when Faith walked down the aisle on Mrs. Henderson's arm, she saw his expression transform into something like awe. "You are breathtaking," he whispered when she reached him, and Faith believed him. The pastor performed the ceremony with warm efficiency, speaking about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. Faith barely heard the words. She was too focused on Ben, on the way he held her hands like they were made of glass, on the love shining in his eyes. When it came time for the vows, his voice was steady and sure. "I, Benjamin Oliver, take you, Faith Ramsey, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you for all the days of my life. I promise to see you, really see you, every single day. I promise to remind you how beautiful you are until you believe it as much as I do." Faith's voice shook with emotion as she repeated her own vows. "I, Faith Ramsey, take you, Benjamin Oliver, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and support you in all that you do. I promise to be brave with you, to trust in your love even when I am scared. I promise to build a life with you that is full of joy and laughter and hope." When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Ben kissed her with a tenderness that made Faith's knees weak. The small congregation erupted in applause, and Faith felt a happiness so complete it almost hurt. They had a simple meal at the restaurant where Ben had first taken her to dinner, and then they rode out to the ranch together on Ben's horse, Faith seated in front of him with his arms wrapped securely around her waist. The cabin looked welcoming in the afternoon sun, smoke rising from the chimney where Mr. Patterson had thoughtfully started a fire to ward off the evening chill. "Welcome home, Mrs. Oliver," Ben said, dismounting and then lifting Faith down. He carried her across the threshold, both of them laughing at the old-fashioned gesture, and set her down gently in their sitting room, their cabin, their home. Faith looked around, taking in the handmade furniture and the warm glow of the fire and the windows that looked out over the ranch land. It was not grand or fancy, but it was theirs, built on hard work and hope and love. "What are you thinking?" Ben asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I am thinking that I am the luckiest woman in the world," Faith said, leaning back against him. 6 months ago I thought my life was over because a man rejected me for my scar, but now I realize that was not the end. It was just the beginning." Ben turned her to face him, his hands framing her face the way they had that first day at the dress shop. "Your scar is part of your story, Faith. It is part of what made you into the woman I love, but it does not define you. You define you. Your kindness, your strength, your talent, your beautiful heart. That is what I see when I look at you." Faith stood on her toes and kissed him, pouring all of her love and gratitude and joy into it. Ben responded in kind, and soon they were moving toward the bedroom, their kisses growing more passionate, their hands exploring with a mixture of eagerness and tenderness. They had waited for this moment, saved it for their wedding night, and now that it was here Faith felt no fear, only a sense of rightness. Ben undressed her slowly, his fingers gentle on the buttons of her wedding dress. When the dress finally pooled at her feet, Faith stood before him in just her chemise, feeling more vulnerable and more beautiful than she ever had before. Ben looked at her like she was a miracle. "You are perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Every single part of you." They made love by the light of the fire, learning each other's bodies with care and patience. There was some awkwardness, as there always is the first time, but there was also laughter and whispered words of love and a connection that went deeper than the physical. When it was over, Faith lay in Ben's arms feeling complete in a way she never had before. "I love you," she whispered, tracing patterns on his chest. "I love you too, Faith. More than words can say." They fell asleep tangled together, the fire dying to embers and the stars bright outside their window. Faith's last thought before sleep claimed her was that she had finally found where she belonged. The months that followed were a time of settling into their new life together. Faith continued to work at the dress shop 3 days a week, making the ride into independence on the mare Mr. Patterson had given them as a wedding present. The other days she spent at the cabin, learning to manage a household and cook proper meals and tend the garden Ben had planted. It was harder work than she had expected, but she found satisfaction in it. There was something deeply fulfilling about making a home with Ben, about creating a space that was uniquely theirs. Ben thrived at the ranch, his skills with cattle and horses earning him Mr. Patterson's trust and respect. The older man began to rely on him more and more, asking his opinion on purchases and decisions about the herd. It was clear that Mr. Patterson was grooming Ben to take over more responsibility, and Faith was proud of her husband's growing confidence and competence. Their evenings were their favorite time, when the work was done and they could simply be together. They would sit by the fire, Ben carving small figures out of wood while Faith sewed, and talk about their days. Sometimes they would read aloud to each other from the small collection of books they were slowly acquiring. Other times they would just sit in comfortable silence, content in each other's presence. Winter came early that year, bringing snow and cold winds that howled around the cabin. But inside they were warm and safe, wrapped in quilts and each other's arms. Faith learned to love the isolation of winter, the way it forced them to turn inward and focus on each other. She felt closer to Ben than ever, their bond deepening with every shared moment. It was in late December, as they were preparing for Christmas, that Faith realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, noticing the changes in her body and the way certain smells made her nauseous. When she finally worked up the courage to tell Ben, he lifted her up and spun her around, his joy so intense it was almost tangible. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to be parents." Faith laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed by the magnitude of it. She was going to be a mother. She and Ben were going to bring a new life into the world, a child who would be loved and wanted and cherished. "Are you scared?" Ben asked later, his hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "Terrified," Faith admitted, "but also so happy I could burst." "I never thought I would have this, Ben. A husband, a home, a baby. I never thought anyone would want me enough to give me all of this." "I want you," Ben said fiercely. "I will always want you, and our child is going to be so loved, Faith. We are going to give them everything we never had." They spent the winter preparing for the baby, Ben building a cradle from wood he carefully selected and sanded smooth, Faith sewing tiny clothes and blankets from soft fabric. Mr. Patterson was delighted at the news, declaring that a baby was just what the ranch needed. He began talking about expanding the operation, about building a bigger house where Ben and Faith could raise their growing family. The old man had no children of his own, and he had clearly adopted Ben and Faith as surrogate family. Spring brought new life to the ranch, calves being born and the prairie grass greening up. Faith's pregnancy became more visible, her stomach rounding out and the baby beginning to move. She loved feeling those first flutters, loved knowing that a little life was growing inside her. Ben would talk to her stomach at night, telling the baby stories about his day and promising to teach them to ride and rope and work the land. On a warm evening in May, as the sun was setting over the hills, Faith felt the first labor pains. She tried to stay calm, tried to remember everything the midwife had told her during their visits, but fear clawed at her throat. So many women died in childbirth. What if something went wrong? What if she left Ben alone with a child he would have to raise on his own? Ben rode hard for the midwife while Mr. Patterson stayed with Faith, his presence calm and reassuring. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. There were moments when Faith thought she could not go on, when the pain was so intense she wanted to give up. But Ben was there, holding her hand and wiping her forehead, and telling her she was the strongest person he had ever known. And when their son finally came into the world, red-faced and screaming, Faith felt a surge of love so powerful it made everything else fade away. "He is perfect," Ben said, tears streaming down his face as he held their baby for the first time. "Faith, he is absolutely perfect." They named him William Oliver, after Ben's father. He had a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually settle into the same blue-gray as his father's. Faith had worried during the pregnancy about whether she would know how to be a mother, but the moment she held William, she knew she would do anything for him. She would protect him and love him and make sure he never felt unwanted or less than. The weeks after William's birth were exhausting and wonderful. Faith learned to function on little sleep, to nurse the baby and change him and soothe him when he cried. Ben was an involved father from the start, taking William when he could to give Faith a break, walking the floor with him when he was fussy at night. They moved through those early weeks as a team, supporting each other through the challenges and celebrating every milestone. William was 6 months old when Mr. Patterson called Ben and Faith to the main house for a serious conversation. The old man looked tired but determined as he gestured for them to sit. "I am getting old," he said without preamble. "My body is not what it used to be, and this ranch is too much for me to manage on my own. Ben, you have been a godsend this past year and a half. You work hard, you are honest, and you care about this place. I want to make you a partner." Ben stared at him in shock. "Sir, I do not have the capital for that kind of investment." "I am not asking for money," Mr. Patterson said. "I am asking for your time and your commitment. I want to split the ranch 50-50. You handle the day-to-day operations and the big decisions, and in exchange, you and Faith and that beautiful baby boy own half of everything. When I die, it all goes to you." Faith felt tears prick her eyes. It was more than they had ever dreamed, more than they had dared to hope for. Ben looked at her and she nodded, unable to speak. "We accept," Ben said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, sir. You have already given us so much." "You have given me more," Mr. Patterson said simply. "You have given me family when I thought I would spend my last years alone. This is the least I can do." The partnership changed everything. Ben threw himself into the ranch with renewed energy, making improvements and expanding the herd. Faith continued her work at the dress shop but cut back her hours, spending more time at home with William. They talked about having more children, about building the bigger house Mr. Patterson had mentioned. Life felt full and rich and purposeful. William was 2 years old when Faith became pregnant again. This time she was less frightened, more confident in her body's ability to bring life into the world. The pregnancy was easier than the first, and when their daughter was born on a snowy December evening, the labor was mercifully short. They named her Rose after Faith's mother, and she had Faith's blonde hair and Ben's storm cloud eyes. Ben was besotted with his daughter, holding her constantly and declaring her the most beautiful baby ever born. Faith would watch him with Rose and fall in love with him all over again. He was the father she had always hoped her children would have, patient and loving and present. Mr. Patterson's health began to decline slowly over the next few years. He spent less time working and more time sitting on the porch of the main house, watching Ben manage the ranch with pride in his eyes. He doted on William and Rose, becoming the grandfather they would never have otherwise. Faith made sure to bring the children to visit him regularly, knowing how much joy they brought him. It was on a warm spring morning when the prairie was covered in wildflowers and the air smelled of new grass that Mr. Patterson passed away peacefully in his sleep. They found him in his bed, a small smile on his face, and Faith liked to think he had died happy, knowing that the ranch he loved would continue under Ben's care. The funeral was well attended, Mr. Patterson having been respected in the community. Afterward, Ben and Faith stood at the grave long after everyone else had left, paying their respects to the man who had given them so much. "He saved my life," Ben said quietly. "I was drifting when I met him, lost and running from everything. He gave me a chance when he did not have to. He gave me a home. He loved you like a son," Faith said, taking Ben's hand. "He was proud of you, Ben, proud of what you built here." "What we built," Ben corrected. "None of this would mean anything without you, Faith. You are my home, my heart, my everything. This ranch, this life, it is all for you." Faith squeezed his hand, too moved to speak. They stood together in the quiet of the cemetery, mourning the man who had brought them together and changed their lives. The years that followed were good ones. Ben proved to be an excellent ranch manager, the herd growing and thriving under his care. Faith eventually stopped working at the dress shop entirely, focusing her energy on their home and children. Mrs. Henderson understood, though she missed having Faith around. The two women remained close, Mrs. Henderson visiting the ranch regularly and becoming an honorary grandmother to William and Rose. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working alongside his father. He learned to ride almost as soon as he could walk, and by the time he was 6, he was helping with small chores around the ranch. Rose was more spirited, with a laugh that could light up a room and a stubborn streak that reminded Faith of herself. She had no interest in the domestic arts, preferring to follow her brother and father around and demanding to be taught everything they were learning. Faith became pregnant twice more, giving birth to another son, James, and then a daughter, Clara. Their cabin was too small for their growing family, so Ben built the house he had promised, a sturdy 2-story structure with a big kitchen and enough bedrooms for everyone. Faith planted flowers around the porch and hung curtains in the windows, making it a home. She was hanging laundry one summer afternoon, Clara playing in the grass nearby and the sounds of Ben, and the older children working with the horses drifting on the breeze, when she realized she was completely happy. It was not a grand realization, no dramatic moment of clarity, just a simple awareness that her life was exactly what she wanted it to be. Ben came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" "How lucky I am," Faith said, leaning back against him. "How lucky we are." "I think about that every day," Ben said. "Do you remember that first day when I brought my shirt to be mended?" "Of course I do. I thought you were just another drifter passing through town." "I was. But then I met you, and I realized I had been drifting toward you all along. Toward this life, this family, this home." Faith turned in his arms and looked up at him. His face was more lined than it had been when they met, weathered by years of hard work under the sun, but his eyes still held the same warmth, the same love. "I never thanked you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me. Really seeing me, past the scar and the fear and everything I thought made me unlovable. You changed my life, Ben Oliver. You changed mine too, Faith. You gave me a reason to stop running, a reason to build instead of drift. You gave me everything." He kissed her forehead, right over the scar the same way he had that first night so many years ago. "I love you, every part of you, always." Faith kissed him, tasting salt and sunshine and home. Around them their children played, the ranch thrived, and the future stretched out full of promise. She had been rejected once for having a scar, told she was too damaged to be loved. But a cowboy had traced it gently and called her beautiful, and in doing so had given her the world. William grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over more of the ranch operations as Ben aged. He married a kind woman from town named Sarah, and they gave Faith and Ben their first grandchildren, twin girls who had Sarah's dark eyes and William's serious demeanor. Rose never did develop an interest in traditional feminine pursuits, instead becoming an expert horsewoman and eventually helping to train the horses they bred on the ranch. James went to university in Kansas City, studying agriculture and bringing back new ideas about cattle breeding that helped expand their operation even further. Clara became a teacher at the school in Independence, though she still lived at home and made the trip into town each day. Faith's hair turned gray and lines appeared around her eyes, but Ben still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset over the prairie, and Faith would remember that scared young woman in the dress shop who thought her life was over. She wished she could tell that woman not to give up, that the best was yet to come. Mrs. Henderson passed away when Faith was 45, slipping away peacefully in her sleep, just like Mr. Patterson had. Faith mourned the woman who had been like a mother to her, but she was grateful for the years they had shared. At the funeral, she stood between Ben and her children, surrounded by the family she had built, and felt Mrs. Henderson's presence like a blessing. Ben's hair turned completely white by the time he was 50, but he was still strong and active, still working the ranch every day. They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a big party at the ranch. All of their children and grandchildren gathering to honor the love that had built their family. Faith looked around at the crowd, at the life she and Ben had created from nothing but hope and hard work, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. "What are you thinking?" Ben asked, the same question he had been asking for 25 years. "That I would do it all again," Faith said. "Every moment, every struggle, every joy. I would choose you every single time, even knowing how it would start, with me walking into a dress shop needing a shirt mended, especially knowing that. Because it led us here to this moment, to this life, to everything we have built together." Ben pulled her into his arms and kissed her, ignoring the hoots and hollers from their children. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were laughing. "I love you, Faith Oliver," Ben said. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days we have left. I love you too, Benjamin Oliver. Always." As the party continued around them, music playing and children laughing and the ranch thriving under the care of multiple generations, Faith touched the scar on her face. It was still there, faded with age but visible, a permanent reminder of the tragedy that had orphaned her. But it no longer defined her. She was not the scarred seamstress who had been rejected. She was Faith Oliver, wife and mother and grandmother, a woman who had built a life full of love and purpose. The scar was part of her story, but it was not the whole story. The whole story was written in the home she and Ben had built, in the children they had raised, in the love that had sustained them through decades of joy and sorrow. The whole story was still being written, in the grandchildren who played on the same land where their parents had grown up, in the ranch that continued to thrive, in the legacy of love and hard work they would leave behind. Faith had been rejected for having a scar, but a cowboy had traced it gently and called her beautiful, and together they had created something beautiful in return. A family, a home, a love story that would be told for generations, and in the end, that was all that mattered.